Hello and welcome back to Podcasting is Praxis. I'm James and my pronouns are they and them.
I'm Jamie, my pronouns are he and him.
I'm Rob, mine are also he and him.
And I'm Alistair, and my pronouns are also he and him.
Again, no David for this episode. He has descended into the foul crypts of a dread necromancer and is contesting the dire forces therein. Whether he will return to the world of light, no man yet knows. He'll be back later. So this time, it's another cultural committee. We've decided that we're breaking with tradition yet again, and we're doing another good movie.
Not like they could stop us.
Yeah. Exactly. You can pry the movies out of our cold, dead hands.
Indeed. Maybe that's what David's doing right this second to the necromancer. Anyway, so we've decided. Last time when we did a good movie, we watched Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and it was Jamie's favourite movie.
I think you find last time we watched a good movie, it was Hitman Agent 47 starring Rupert Friend.
So last time Jamie got us into trouble. This time we decided to take a tour into the mind of none other than Rob, who suggested, I don't know, well, what have you suggested, Rob? What is it we watched this time?
We watched 2011's Margin Call, which is possibly my favourite movie of all time, or at least a strong, top 3 contender.
Why does that not surprise me?
I fucking love this movie.
We all love Zachary Quinto's robot metal tits.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with this film, it's The Boss Baby, I imagine.
It's a good film. It's a good film. We will warn everyone that Kevin Spacey features prominently in it.
Yeah, I was going to say
something not legally actionable.
And there is our first filter of the episode.
No, I don't think so. Like,
do you think we can get away with that one?
Kevin Spacey has a problem with this. You can
ask us nicely to behave.
Oh, there it definitely is. Jesus fucking Christ. So yeah, watch as we try and navigate the world of talking about a film with Kevin Spacey in it with Jamie on the episode. But no, we watched Margin Call, and it is a good film, starring Kevin Spacey, Paul Bettany, Jeremy Irons, Zachary Quinto, and then a few others. Demi Moore is in
Demi Moore is in there. Simon Baker's in there.
Don't dare do down Stanley Tucci. Holy shit!
And Stanley Tucci. It's a monster of a cast.
That guy from The Mentalist.
Yeah, Simon Baker. Yeah.
Oh, is that who that is? Right.
Who is incredibly good in this as well. Everybody's just. There is not a bad performance in this. Genuinely not. Kevin Spacey's is probably the worst in it, I would say.
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
I think that's fair. I think my favourite was Paul Bettany, to be honest. I really liked him in this.
Yeah. But Paul Bettany just
insofar as the
general.
character is likeable.
Oh no, they're all pricks.
So, yeah, I mean, we should stress that this is not a film where you're meant to like anyone, right?
No.
There isn't. Sorry,
I do like the scene. There's a scene quite a way into the film where it's like, should we feel bad about this?
Yeah.
To which the resounding answer is not really.
Yeah. It is interesting actually to consider that we've now done 2 films where there's no one in it who's meant to be unambiguously good or anything. We seem to like films about various shades of bastard, and Margin Call.
Maybe we see something of ourselves in these films. Who's to say?
Yeah, strange, some kind of mirror. Art is the mirror of the world. Anyway, so we really do want to stress right at the outset that when you go watching this film, you're watching bad people doing bad things and just enjoying the drama of it, essentially. You get to watch people's souls erode in real time, and what's not to love about that?
As to whether or not they had any in the first place is also kind of debatable as well. But yeah, it's just a fucking great movie. I really love it very, very much. It's it's the best sort of comparison that I can make of it for other movies is it's a more it has shades of Glengarry Glen Ross, the 1992 one, where everybody knows the Alec Baldwin scene of Always Be Closing, the opening bit.
Yeah,
it's a bit like that, but except sort of that one's set in this little grotty real estate office. This is set in these incredibly clinical and subtly lit skyscrapers, high finance, but the characters are essentially just kind of as grotty and unlikable as they are in Glengarry Glen Ross, and the incentives are about the same.
My strange thing watching it is, in a bizarre way, it feels like the way it's filmed is kind of gothic.
Yes.
Like, it's filmed in a kind of clinical, everything's dark and like detached. It's set pretty much over the course of like a couple of days, and it starts at night. And it, well, no, that's a lie.
That's
actually,
24
it starts
hours.
under fluorescent.
It's one full day, isn't it?
And it starts under fluorescent lighting, basically, and then goes overnight, and you only start to get sunlight at the very end of it, essentially.
Yes.
It's a definitely kind of it's a film for people who are sealed away from the world, so to speak, in how it handles its characters. These are vampires, basically, and so the film itself has this kind of texture of kind of gothic remove to it, which is kind of cool. It works.
There's an entire scene where they like potter about on the top of the skyscraper, looking out over the city, which is
I mean, all of it, like, because so much of it is like set in the dead of night because of the shenanigans that are ongoing. It's just like all of it. You have a lot of this like black and bluish, like sort of gothic, or maybe I would more describe it as like an operating table. It's got this sort of weirdly sterile thing. And apart from like the 8 people who, like the 8 characters who are in this, the 8 like actors who drive this thing, the extras are really like extra. There's a great scene in the second half of the movie where Simon Baker and Demi Moore are like sort of plotting whether or not one of them or both of them is like have a career, survive like the night in terms of their career, and they're standing in this lift in between them is a cleaner who is just like a normal person. And it's incredibly weird because you have a couple of these scenes where there's like cleaners and like normal people in the background, but it's all like everything else is sort of empty and nobody's there because everybody's also been fired. And we'll get into the plot and everything, but it
definitely, like, the extras in the film are, it's like they're the herd, and these are the sharks, or the kind of, predators, if you will, that the film's actually concerned with. The
sharks that famously prey on herds.
Well, okay, I mean, if I said school, it wouldn't have the same resonance, but you get the idea. It's like...
A normal man
is in this.
Oh my god. But in all seriousness, like, all the extras are things that they use. They're depersonalized. They don't matter to their world. And yet the film intentionally plays this up. There's an intentional contrast, particularly that scene with the cleaners that Rob is referencing. So to really bring this into focus, these people might as well be liches or vampires, or this is their world and we are merely living in it, is very much like a subtext of this film.
Profound alienation of what they do and who they are to,
and also how they
everything else.
Then in the brief scenes where they talk about, because it is a film. Maybe we haven't made this clear. I don't think we did. It is essentially a film about the 2008 financial crash, which is why it's also a me movie. There are occasional scenes, and we'll go through it as we talk about the movie, where they talk about the effects that their works and what they are about to do will have on like ordinary people, and it's like what they're constantly doing, or at least most of them are doing, is sort of self-justifying why what they're doing isn't actually like vampiric and evil, but necessary, or at least like or at best like value neutral. That it would have happened anyway, and we're just here for the ride. And so
shall we sort of get into it? Shall I set the scene? So the setup for this is, in 2008, an unnamed investment bank, because they would all be very titchy about having their names anywhere near this.
Bayman Lovers,
it begins laying off a large number of employees. Among these affected is a guy named Eric Dale, who's head of risk management. Who's he played by again? Can you remember?
It's Stanley Tucci.
Stanley Tucci's sacked for having too rugged a beard.
He absolutely. But again, like already this intro scene, it's not unfamiliar in sort of large corporates in general, but especially not in the financial sector. Like, the first thing you see is like this sort of line of HR people and security people, and like people walking behind them with like boxes with their stuff, who've clearly just been sacked. And like the first thing you see is like these people sort of streaming out of the building because they've all been sacked, and now it's like the HR, like the firing squad is essentially like coming to the floor where most of the rest of the movie's gonna play out. And you see Paul Bettany and not Stanley Tucci, but you see Paul Bettany and Zachary Quinto and Penn Badgley, and it's like, oh my god, it's them. And two of them, like the two juniors, so Penn Badgley and Zachary Quinto, have never been through it before. So they're like, fuck, are they about to... Because nobody knows who's getting fired yet or not. It's like you get called into an office and then essentially they just put a stun gun, they just put a bolt gun to your head and tell you to fuck off. But the person who gets fired is Eric Dale, played by Stanley Tucci.
And he's head of risk management, which ought to set the tone. They're having a downturn, they're downsizing, and the first person they're firing is the head of their risk management, right? What's interesting is, as he's being fired, he attempts to tell them about the implications of a model he's working on, saying, listen, I'm actually doing something kind of important. And there's a very interesting kind of exchange happens there, because the person in the room who's firing him misreads it as him trying to justify why they should keep him on. Whereas he's actually trying to warn them, no, I think I've come onto something that's kind of dangerous. But because of that, because of the circumstance, because of the structure that he's in, no one pays him any attention. So on his way out the door, he gives a flash drive containing his work to one of those two junior associates, Peter Sullivan, and warns him to be careful. And so the film really kicks off because Sullivan is intrigued by this and decides to stay after.
There's almost this sort of great, like that little scene is great because like it has that, what you would just talk about earlier, James. It has a sort of near like gothic horror vibe because it's just as like the lift doors are closing and Stanley Tucci is standing there with like his Boxo stuff because he's just been sacked, and like right before the lift doors close, he gives him this USB drive and says, "Be careful," and it's like this sort of, you definitely know something's up.
Yeah,
I do like how there is throughout the film, pretty much only two people have any clue about what is happening, and that is Peter Sullivan and Eric Dale, so Stanley Tucci and Zachary Quinto, and everyone else is basically a fucking idiot in comparison because Peter Sullivan is able to complete this thing that Eric Dale's put together, and it's like I say, the only two people have any clue about what's going on.
Yeah, and they are among the most junior as well.
Which, again, is interesting. Head of risk management gets fired. Head of risk management tries to warn them, listen, something's really bad. And the only one who listens is another person in the risk management department. And what's really interesting, and what I love about this scene, is Sullivan stays after hours, while meanwhile his friends go out to do their champagne and, all the other stuff at the club.
We survived.
Yeah, because, they didn't get fired.
In the meantime, you also have this little scene with... after everybody's been fired, you have Paul Bettany comes into Kevin Spacey.
Paul Bettany talking to
Kevin Spacey.
Come on, Jamie, please.
He comes and he says, like, look, everybody who's been fired has been fired, and like they've all taken their boxes and fucked off. So like you have to give a pep talk. And like Kevin Spacey just like he's been through this a bunch of times. So he just says, look, 3 out of every 7 people in this entire firm has just been shit canned. Like they were good, but you were better, and like that's like less people standing between you and your boss's job. So like good job on surviving. So it's incredibly like the tone is set very sharply. Like this is not a human workplace. This is this is sort of a tank full of sharks that are like the moment you show weakness or you're not good enough or your quarter is bad or like you work in a non-productive sector like risk management, you're just going to get your legs cut out. And later on, like through inference, you can sort of work out why Stanley Tucci gets sacked. Like it's not stated, but you can work it out later in.
And I will add, like, I've mentioned this before. During my degree, I had to do an internship over the summer. And my degree wasn't in anything finance related, but I ended up working for JP Morgan Chase on an internship. And this was before my politics had really taken form and I really understood shit from shit. It was right around just before the 2008 crisis was kicking off, right? And I have to say, they've nailed the vibe, because I was in the tech department and the techies themselves were normal people, but everyone over them was exactly like this, and it's really... that's one of the things that struck me about the film. It is authentic to experience. Like, they really are like this. It can't be overstated. Anyway, so yeah, he works late and he goes, holy shit, and basically calls his friend, the other junior guy in the department, who's, doing champagne and just celebrating with the others that they survived. And what he discovers is that the assumptions underpinning the firm's risk profile, the way they do all their balancing and carefully making sure that no matter what way it plays out in practice, they're going to be okay, the assumptions are wrong. The historical volatility levels, i.e. how much the price will change in mortgage-backed securities, they assumed they would always stay pretty much level. And instead, they're
within
being
certain
exceeded.
ranges, but but the ranges are like, again, this is... We just did a whole finance episode, so I'm going to try not to do it again. Like it is the 2008 crisis, and it's like, you're at the point, and this is like there are historical parallels to what happened here as well, and specifically in terms of Goldman Sachs, where like people had started to work out, wait a minute, the models that we use specifically for all the housing stuff as to how many people would pay back the mortgages they signed up for. This doesn't add up for shit anymore. Like, if you've seen The Big Short, essentially this is like the first... These are among the first people who have worked out that the whole pyramid is like not just unstable, but about to just explode, basically. Like, about to collapse.
They've kind of like, there is the people who did all the shorts, who are the subjects of The Big Short, who basically decided, we think it's going to be fucked. They figured it out way in advance and then just sat waiting for it to happen. This is the financial firms realizing, the guys taking the short position are correct, and not only that, it's about to go down. Right?
And we are about to go down.
Jeremy Irons later says in the film, the music has stopped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what this means is that since all their assumptions about how safe mortgage-backed securities were wrong, that means that they are over-leveraged. What they mean by that is they just have far too many of these mortgage-backed securities that they are counting on turning up good. So it means when they all turn up bad, they're going to implode. They're done. They'll be over. The music has stopped. The assumption that these are all good is now being revealed as being dog shit.
Yeah.
And so the debt that they accrue when all of these, like, they were banking on them all being good, when too many of them go bad, all that debt will bankrupt a company. Yeah. And so Sullivan realizes this and goes, oh shit, and calls his colleague Seth Bregman. Who's Seth Bregman paid by again?
Penn Badgley. He's most famous from either Gossip Girl or that Netflix thing You, which I haven't watched. But he plays it fantastically as well. He plays it as such a little prick. Like, junior level prick. It's fucking incredible. Like,
So he calls him at the champagne bar and says, can you get the head of credit trading, Will Emerson? Who plays Will Emerson? Anyone remember?
Paul Bettany.
Paul Bettany, there we go. Yeah. He says, can you grab him, and can both of you please come back to the office now? And they go back to the office.
I should say at this point as well, like what we are talking about here and like the context we're giving you about the trading and stuff, this movie does not do that. Like, it takes until like the first big meeting where pretty much all the characters are in one room until somebody explains to you like materially what this model is and what they've just found out. And what it is one of the things I like about this movie in general, in contrast to so many other fucking movies produced today, is it does not treat you like a moron. It just assumes that you are an intelligent person who can either work things out or is willing to like wait for the explanation. Like, it doesn't hold hands as much, and it's one of the things I really like about it.
Yeah, so from the typical like viewer's experience, what you're seeing is guy in charge of risk has been fired, and on the way out door he says, listen, I found something really risky. Junior guy follows it through and goes, oh shit, and then summons more senior guy who, in this case, Will Emerson. He looks at it. They come back to the office for the junior guy and Will Emerson. Emerson looks at it and he goes, oh shit, and he summons his boss, Sam Rogers.
He looks at it and has to get like the other two to explain it to him.
This is what I was saying earlier. Pretty much everyone above Peter Sullivan, with the exception of Eric Dale, Stanley Tucci, is like it just says, I don't care. I'm not interested in the specifics. Talk to me like a child. Or Jeremy Irons, talk to me like I'm a golden retriever, which I found amusing.
Yeah.
I did like that. That, like, you know what I mean. They've got very few people around who are actually clever, and are in charge of like just fucking making the guide rail that all the salesmen like roll down every day, and all the salesmen themselves are just thick as shit.
Yeah,
none of them actually understand what they're doing or the implications of it.
Yeah, or they're so like high above the people who do the actual math that they're like, well, I don't know. And this is a lot of parallels with 2008, where it turned out that like the big CEOs like Jamie Dimon, for example, when they were asked by the Senate, like, did you know what those guys were doing? And they were all said, look, no, we fucking don't, because we don't have like PhDs in astrophysics or something like that. We don't understand the math.
Peter Sullivan quite literally has a PhD in rocket science.
He's a rocket scientist. So. Yeah. And it's...
We'll get to that, because that's a brilliant scene.
There's another great bit. We'll get to that. But like, as James was saying, like, and again, this is not explained, but you can work it out in the course of the movie, is once Paul Bettany's character, who's like another step up in the seniority ladder, has worked out that shit is going seriously sideways, he calls Kevin Spacey, who's in his car on the way home.
His boss names is Sam Rogers. So
Sam Rogers.
Anyway, carry on.
And he says, you need to get back to the office now, because things are a-doing. And then Kevin Spacey says, well, just explain it to me. And then he says, well, I can't, you need to just be back here. And then Spacey says, well, Spacey's character says, well, you just need to send me an email and I'll look at it. And at that point, Paul Bettany says, I don't think that would be a good idea. And you can work out later, but it's essentially inferences. If we put this in an email, there will be a paper trail that some lawyer or like government official can find later. So come back here so we can do this in person, where this conversation will not be recorded for like legal action later.
And this is very important, because this is the moment when he says that, Kevin Spacey, credit where it's due, he does actually play it well. You see the penny drop for him, and as he goes,
yes,
oh, we're in shit. You need to have a conversation with me that is completely off record. That must be serious, and he orders the car turned around, essentially. So they basically come back, and again, it's explained to Kevin Spacey with yet another layer of, I don't understand this shit, simplify it for me. And they're like, right, are you sure you've done it right? They're like, okay, this is big. Are you sure about this? Let's go get the guy we fired, Eric Dale, and check. Like, let's see about this. But they can't contact him because his company phone has been shut off after he's fired. So
while I remember, I do want to bring up that we get a fantastic phone throw earlier on in the film, where Eric Dale realizes that the phone's been immediately disconnected as soon as he leaves the building after being fired. Just completely obliterates that fucking phone. It's incredible.
Yeah, like he's trying to phone his wife or order a taxi or something, and he realizes it's dead, and he just hurls it at the pavement with great abandon, and it's very good. That's a one take, or we need a new phone kind of scene, frankly. So yeah, basically, Seth and Peter, the two junior guys, are sent out to go get him. Just go get him and bring him here. And they're like, well, he doesn't work for us anymore. And we're like, just tell him we'll make him whole, bring him here, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, they ring his wife first, and she says, well, he hasn't come home. And then there's sort of like it gets more interesting later, but essentially they just send Zachary Quinto and Pan Badgley out to a strip club to just sort of, maybe he's there because that's where he hangs out if he's had like a shit day. And again, like you have this, I don't know, James, if you wanted to still get there, but like you have this great scene in this strip club where again it's completely depersonalized. There's not really people there, and it's just like, and then you have this sort of, again, Penn Badgley plays such like a great little deformed weasel who is like just absorbed finance as like a total lifestyle, because he keeps asking in every scene. It's just like, how much do you think these girls make? How much do you think the CEO makes? How much do you think Paul Bettany carries?
He's exactly like someone that I know in real life. He's obsessed with how much other people make, how much he makes, how much his boss makes, and like that's all that matters to him.
Mm-hmm.
and it's just yeah.
It's pretty good, and it stresses that underpinning a lot of this is just constant status anxiety rooted in people's financial worth. So, and meanwhile, while they're doing that, the two more senior guys, Sam and Will, they're like, we need to inform the company's senior management of this situation. So, basically, they have another meeting with the intermediate division head, Jared Cohen. Who's he again? Can anyone remember?
Simon Baker, the mentalist.
Yes, he is. Right, excellent. Who's chief... he's the division head, and then we have Sarah Robertson, who's Demi Moore, and a few other senior executives, I can't remember who. They basically have a meeting with them where they lay this out, and they are, yet again, it needs to be dumbed down for them, but these guys repeat the dumbed down explanations they received before, as though they're their explanations, which is a really nice touch. Like, it's, these guys had to have it dumbed down for them, and now, rather than admit they don't know, they use the dumbed-down explanation they themselves were given to sell the others on how serious it is, which is just a wonderful, like, these guys don't know shit kind of moment. They conclude that the findings are accurate, and there's a little... I don't know, Rob, do you want to talk about the little bit where it's kind of like... It's implied that they knew this was sort of coming?
It's not implied that they knew that was coming, but what is like, and it becomes clearer once you have the big group meeting where Jeremy Irons gets introduced, is that like the two of them, Simon Baker and Demi Moore's characters, have been like operationally responsible for like going more and more into the mortgage business essentially, and like getting more levered up and like creating, you know, because the profits were extreme, but it is implied that they at least knew that what they were doing was like on the riskier side of the spectrum. Like they didn't know that shit's gone this far out of control, but they definitely knew, you know, what was happening. Like they had an inkling of how far it was going to go.
I do also like though that whenever like two characters that are in the same room together that aren't that don't have Peter Sullivan and Seth Bregman in the same room, they're always politicking against each other about who backed what to do what and who's fucking who. It's just every single fucking scene without exception, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, this is just who they are. So at this point, they basically conclude, shit, we need to call the boss, and so they call the CEO John Told, who is Jeremy Irons, and who steals every scene he's in my view.
He
personally.
just fucking
100%.
blows it away. It's so good. Like he's so good in this.
I didn't think much of Jeremy Irons in this.
Okay.
He just it's weird, but it felt like it felt too similar to his performance in Die Hard 3. Like when he's the fucking like terrorist guy in Die Hard 3, and he keeps doing like different voices to different, when he's like pretend, you know, when he's infiltrating places or deceiving people, he's putting on all these different. It felt like I was watching like Simon Gruber doing a bit. But like it was weird. It just I don't know specifically what it was, but from the first scene, I just got the air that he was just doing the same character.
Well, I think it works.
I mean, it didn't ruin the film or anything like, but it just I didn't think it was. It wasn't. I wouldn't say it was one of the better performances in the film. It just seemed a bit like, I don't know. It feels playing like a guy who like, you know, everyone would you would think everyone would expect to be very sort of professional and competent and intelligent, and then playing him as a bit of a weird guy who's like not really as clever as he seems is just not like, I don't know. I mean, it's a thing I had with the film where I think if I'd seen it, like, I mean, what was it, 2011 it came out?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think even then it might have been like too late, but I think if I'd seen it like before I'd actually, you know what I mean, before I'd come to the position where I decided that the economy is fake and that like believing in any of this horse shit is how they get you, then it would probably have been like a really like big thing, you know, like, oh, this really like opened my eyes to how fucking farcical the whole thing is. But watching it now, it was just sort of like, no, yeah, I mean, yeah, this guy's turned up and he's the CEO, and they pay him like fucking like however many like
86
billions
million,
of dollars a
86
year.
million.
Yeah. How they pay him all that money every year because he's the guy that can just sense where things are going, and it's like I'm just like, no, yeah, that seems pretty standard. Like that is exactly the kind of stupid horseshit I would expect the people who run the world to be up to.
Yeah. But I mean, this is the thing. He nails the performance. He plays that character because that's the reality of what it is. And it's also, I want to be really crystal clear on it. What is revealed in the film is the reason he's paid 86 million is not because he can see where things are going. He clearly can't. The reason he's paid 86 million is he knows exactly what ruthless, merciless, like killer thing to do for the direction of the company, which is where we go with the film. Essentially, he's the one who he asks for his underlings' opinions, and he goes for the most ruthless, direct self-preservation one, and he's totally bloodless about it. And it's like that's his character, you know. He's almost playing it like through the position he's been endowed with. He's been given this almost force of nature like capacity over his underlings, and like Irons plays it. And the fact that it's kind of pathetic is, you know, and like that if you stop and look at it outside the seriousness with which they're all taking it, it is kind of just farcical, but that's kind of the reality of it.
Yeah,
because he does feel a bit like a Jamie Dimon or the similar, you know?
I mean, his
characters... like I say, I don't think it's that much. I think if Jeremy Irons had just turned up and been Jeremy Irons, it wouldn't have been that different. Like, I could easily imagine that guy, like, talking about how, you know, gay marriage means that, like, uncles should be allowed to fuck their sons or something, whatever the fuck he was on about that one time. You know, for tax purposes. But, like, I don't think it was a particularly... I mean, I think, generally, I struggle to think of a Jeremy Irons role that I would really rate. I think he's very overrated as an actor.
Okay, right. Well, there's an out accountant for taste. So, I guess...
I mean, don't get me wrong, he was really, really good in Dungeons and Dragons.
I mean, if he'd worn lipstick in this, it would have really added to the role. But yeah, so they basically conclude he's got to turn up, and he arrives by helicopter, because of course he fucking does, you know? And he arrives by helicopter.
You're not allowed to do that. You haven't been allowed to land a helicopter on a roof in New York since like the 70s or something. Because someone did a minor 9/11 on some famous building.
An 8/11.
Yeah, 8/10.
Yeah, and
I'm checking this.
Yeah, and while he comes in, Paul Bettany, the three junior at this point they're the three juniors, because every time they introduce new people, they're essentially more senior until you get to Jeremy Irons, who's the CEO.
Yeah.
And Paul Bettany and Zachary Quinto and Penn Badgley they're standing, Alistair, this is what you were talking about earlier. They're standing on the roof of the giant skyscraper with, like, you know, the sort of ants of the real world underneath them, talking about, you know, how Paul Bettany spent like $2.5 million every year. And he just sort of jokes, well, you learn to spend what's in your pocket. And it's just... They all sort of they laugh about it, but it is sort of accepted as real that it's kind of, you know, okay to be paid that amount of money. And, you know, there's this great bit where Paul Bettany like climbs over the railing, or half climbs over the railing, and like looks down at like this, I don't know, 100-story drop or however fucking far it is. And I can't remember the exact line, but it's something like, you know, the people aren't actually afraid.
He says that when people get near like an edge, like a drop like that, they're not afraid of falling, they're afraid that they might jump.
Yes, exactly. And it's like, you know, again, that's very thematic for the whole film as well. It's like, what I liked about, or, you know, are they, in the end, the whole thing, they all jump, but it is to save themselves. It's yeah.
What I liked about that scene was when he's explaining how he spent like $2.5 million in a year. He starts with, well, the tax man takes like half of it straight away, so just like wipe that out. And like that was, you know what I mean? Whenever you hear all this shit about, oh, if you tax the rich, they'll just go somewhere else. No, they fucking won't. They don't care.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if they get paid like fucking 3 million quid and you go, right, well, we're having $1 million of that to pay for roads, they're not going to give a shit. Do you know what I mean? It's like, what were they going to do with that extra $1 million?
More cars.
I mean, what he says in the scene is like, so half of it goes to the tax man, so that's like $1.25 million left. And at the end of this like explanation of what he spends the money on, he keeps 400,000 for a rainy day. Like, like I'm pretty sure we've joked on the podcast before about rich people just hoarding money like fucking Smaug. And like, yeah, this is literally how they operate. It's like this money is better off in my wallet than it is anywhere else. So I'm going to keep it.
It's So you get to Jeremy Irons is sort of introduced as well, because Simon Baker says, like, because they all have to go to the meeting, because essentially, like, you have to catch it. You have to, like, if you're like me, you've watched it a bunch of times. But like, there's a reason that Simon Baker's character, like, because he plays like obviously the successor to Jeremy Irons when he retires or whatever, because he's obviously like a fucking psychopath. You know, he's a stone dead-eyed psychopath, like completely willing to do whatever it takes to save his career, to save the firm, whatever. And like he says he brings like the Super Juniors and Paul Bettany's character in as well into the meeting, and he says, look, whatever you do, don't lie, you're not smart enough to pull it off, essentially, being like Jeremy Irons' character is too clever and you can't work it out, essentially, you're not strong enough. But what I think he's doing in like, if you look at the scene closely, is he doesn't want to be the bearer of the bad news. So he's like, well, if I take Zachary Quinto and the other guy in with me, then they will have to tell the bad news story, and I can be the one who comes up with the solution to the thing. It's he's already playing the politics to save his own ass.
He's also correctly intuiting that the major CEO man is not going to like just go ham on a peon, essentially. And so if a peon delivers the bad news, it's like, you know, it's like, don't shoot the messenger. If they're low down enough, he doesn't associate the messenger with the message. Whereas if it was his right-hand man going boss, then that would sound like an admission of guilt. And so this is why the guy is clever. And I also, by the way, just to give Jamie his credit, I looked it up, and indeed, there are public use helipads in New York City. So this scene, if it was real life, it would have been he lands on a helipad and then commutes in, but that wouldn't have the drama, would it? Strangely, though, you can still land helicopters over in California, so that might have had something to do with it. Anyway, so they have the meeting, and in case it's not obvious, they recall the guy, the low-level peon who discovered and completed the model. And this meeting is very tense, it's very interesting. And in the course of it, you know, it's challenged, like, well... what's interesting is how the challenge is done, is they don't say, well, how do you know this is right? They ask the guy, what's your background, to this junior guy who finished the model. Like, they don't say, well, how do we know this model isn't horseshit? They just attack his credentials. And they attack his credentials by interrogating him and so, what do you do? And he has the hilarious reply.
What is your CV?
Yeah, and he has a hilarious reply that he previously was working on a PhD on rocket science. And then, like, in the room, someone says, so you're literally a rocket scientist. And then someone says, well, why are you in finance? And he's like, rocket science doesn't pay.
Yeah, if I may speak frankly here, the money is considerably better. It's wonderful. Like, it's really like, because it's matched later on by a scene with Stanley Tucci where he says, oh, I built a bridge once. And it's clearly like these people who, without the advent of finance capital, might have actually built a better rocket, or like kept building bridges, or, you know, contributed to society somehow, but now they're just
quite a famous
fucking around with bits of paper.
Yeah, it's quite a famous phenomenon, isn't it? It's like the like brain drain effect that finance has had on the smartest people in you know your Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard graduates. Just they gravitate to the place that gives them a shitload of money for just fucking over like millions of people. Versus, oh, this person might have used their abilities to develop a vaccine or some medication or build bridges or revolutionise like an actual useful industry rather than just a massive parasite that sits on top of all of the wealth that flows in and out of a country. Or
like, you know, in another world, they might have gone to the government and worked on like actually the actual economy in the civil service, but instead they've correctly intuited, well, I could go work in the civil service. I guess it's called that because it's getting so old. I could go work in the civil service like a sucker, or I could go work where the real ruling of the world takes place and make some actual fucking money. And they all do that.
Yeah.
And if they can't do that, then many of them end up doing things like going into regulatory industry, civil service kind of roles, and then dooring their way into the senior roles. So there's almost like two tracks. The ones who are really good go straight into these big firms. The ones who are not quite good enough go to the regulators, but they're angling to get into those major firms as well. And it's all very cynical. And the movie does a good job of portraying that, there is no part of this is good. Like, there's no ancillary effect to this in any way, shape, or form that in any way makes the world better. So anyway, they have that meeting, and Jeremy Irons gets to, chew the scenery and stomp around and go, my job is to tell you when the music has stopped. Do you know what I hear when I look out? Fucking silence.
Silence.
Yeah. And so as a consequence, they have to figure out what's next. And so he has a meeting with the other seniors, and he says, right, pitch me on what we do here. And Cohen, his plan is fire sale of all the problematic assets, just sell it all, clear it off our balance sheets.
Sort of in terms of financial realities, just to explain a little bit, it is at this point that, again, this is a 2008 mortgage crisis, is this unnamed investment bank has essentially worked out that the stuff they're still holding on their books, these millions and millions and millions of mortgages, is essentially dog shit. They know that the people will never pay it back. They know that the whole system's fucked. They know that that the value that has been placed on those mortgages is as they'll be paid back. That's just not going to happen. So they are stuck, to borrow another phrase from Jeremy Irons in that scene, holding the biggest bag of odious excrement ever assembled in the history of capitalism. Now they have to decide what to do with that bag. And
it's very funny because in this scene, his position of we just need to sell it all off to unsuspecting other firms is opposed by the moral conscience of the film, Kevin Spacey's character, which in retrospect is hilarious. He says his counter argument is we can't do that because will damage our relationships and reputation with the industry. No one will want to buy from us again, and us doing this fire sale will tank the market, and it will cause major instability. And Tull, the CEO, cuts through that it doesn't matter whether we blow up everything else and whether we tank our reputation longer term. Our job is to survive, and avoiding bankruptcy is worth the risk and cost of the fire sale and all the instability and reputation damage that will fall off the back of it. So they basically go, hey, if we do this, it's going to set the dominoes rolling. And the CEO goes, fine. And there's a brilliant line which is imprinted on me where he says, panic selling is never a good option. To which the CEO comes back and says, it's not a panic if you're first.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the thesis of this whole thing.
And again, that idea, because this all takes place in this first, in the big board meeting where you really work out the stakes and what's going on. And clearly, it's Simon Baker's plan to just say, let's just take all the shit that we know is dog shit, but let's just sell it anyway and let the panic start with us, because then we're first out the door, and then you're not the one panicking. And it's you could see that that's already the direction he's decided he wants to go, but he waits for Simon Baker's character to propose it first. So even he's covering himself, he's waiting to see, how the chips land and making sure that he's not the one holding the bag. And it's right after that meeting that Simon Baker's character immediately starts making sure that he's also not the one that's going to get the blame. And then you get this great scene in the lift that I was talking about earlier, between they're going down the lift to, I don't know, do stuff and things, and it's Simon Baker, I think, on the left, and then there's the cleaner in the middle, and then Demi Moore on the right hand side. And Demi Moore's character is essentially saying, we decided on this whole thing with the mortgages together. I signed off on it as the chief risk officer. You're the one implementing it. We are tied in this together. And then if I go down, you go down. And then it sort of ends with Simon Baker just saying, well, no, I don't know that is true. I think I can survive. And it's... Yeah,
he basically is saying, I don't see it like that. You're the one who signed the paper. you're in charge of the risk. You're in charge of, like, signing off on it. You signed off on it. I assumed that because you signed off on it, that makes it fine. It's your responsibility. And he basically tells her, no, we're not going to float together. I will absolutely let you sink and, like, be fed to the sharks if it means I can swim to shore.
And the great thing with it is with having the cleaner in the middle is, like, between the two of them, they're talking about, like, instigating a gigantic fuck-off financial crisis that really did hit pretty much everybody in the world in terms of how the economy developed over the 10 years after that. And, like, none of them even see the cleaner in the middle. Like, the person in the middle, the cleaner, that's you. The viewer, you're the cleaner in this situation. They just carry on like she doesn't exist. It's like, it's all about them. Yeah. And it is essentially pretty much, I think, every scene after this is just 2 or 3 people, like various constellations of 2 to 4 of these people in a room, and essentially all they're doing is politicking and trying to, like, drop kick each other out of a window just to, like, stay in the game. It's fucking incredible.
Yeah. So we'll carry on. Cause, like, the interesting thing is, like, first things ripple all the way up, and then the rest of the film has been rippling all the way down. Yes. Essentially, with catastrophic kind of consequences for the rest of us. So Dale's wife phones in and says, "Hey, he's home." And so Emerson travels to him and attempts to persuade him to return to the film, and he's, like, unsuccessful. And they end up having, like, Emerson and Bregman have a philosophical debate about will they lose their job, and they basically say, like, hey, it's the nature of financial markets. Don't lose faith. Your work's necessary. There'll be someone who needs you, kind of thing, right? And essentially, this is now they try and work out the plan of what they're going to do. So, Jeremy Irons, decides who's going to be the scapegoat for this, and ultimately, surprise, surprise, it's Demi Moore, Sarah Robertson. She's going to be the sacrifice, and the fact it's the woman in the firm who gets sacrificed is also really, like, on brand and on point, frankly. And so he basically
there's a great line where they're having this discussion because she's clearly like, look, I shouldn't be the one that gets fired because I can make trouble for you, is the implication if I open my mouth. And he sort of says, you really, really don't want to be the one to do that. And then they have this, she says to him, look, it was all very clear and very well explained, this whole mortgage strategy between the 3 of us, me, you, Jeremy Irons, and Simon Baker. And she says it was made very clear. And then Jeremy Irons cuts in and says, no, actually, it was always a gray area. Like, the thing that you thought was structural, no, it's not. I don't remember this at all the same way because, like, I need to boot you out. But don't worry, we'll pay you off, essentially.
Yeah, he basically says, well, we can spin this such that you are responsible, and I'm afraid you'll find that what you think you've got backstopped in the paperwork isn't. And you don't want to threaten us because then all your severance pay, all your pension, all the rest of it, we will make those disappear. On the other hand, if you go along with this, we will basically fill your pockets with gold to just go away and to be the person who, like, takes the blame and lets us all continue to be the scapegoat, literally, from, the whole purging the community of its sins by going off into the desert on your own. So they agree she's going to be jettisoned after this, and there's nothing she can do about it, and so she just accepts it, right? She tries to dig her way out of it, she just can't. Meanwhile, Eric Dale gets exactly the same treatment. The senior risk officer who was fired, they're basically like, well, listen, you have a bunch of stuff owed to you by us. Either you come back in and cooperate with our plan, for which we will pay you handsomely, we will fill your pockets with gold, or all that shit's going to go away. And they're big enough, and they're rich enough, and they're powerful enough that even if the law might ultimately be on the side of the people getting screwed, it doesn't matter. They're still going to have to go years, possibly decades, without getting what they're owed by the firm, and they need it. They need the money, especially now that they've been made unemployed. And also, that would wreck their reputations for getting into other firms and potentially being able to pick back up. And so Eric Dale, he bows too, and he's like, right, I'll come in and I'll help with this plan in exchange for, like, what was it, $200,000-$400,000 he's promised or something like that?
Per hour or something. He's being paid in the millions to, like, essentially because they fired him before, they're incredibly worried that, like, because he signed the paperwork, that he would either go to, like, a rival firm all the press, all the regulators, and say, this is what I know. And if you come in now hard and fast, you can fuck these people. And presumably
Also,
there's money to be made in that.
They're also very worried about the optics of the fact they fired their senior risk officer right before everything went to shit. And so they're basically paying him to pretend he wasn't fired until after, which is a better look, frankly.
It's at this point as well. It's Paul Bettany and Penn Badgley who are in the car, and they try to get him back, and then they have this conversation. They're both sitting outside Stanley Tucci's like giant new house in Brooklyn, this massive, beautiful looking brownstone building, and it's essentially like he's showing off how good his math is. Like, I built a bridge once, and because, people, instead of driving the long way around to the next bridge, because I built this bridge, these two communities saved like thousands of hours a day, therefore millions of hours a year. I've saved these people thousands of years of travel time just from building a small bridge. And like the point of that whole scene is, again, like what we were just talking about earlier with the rocket scientists as well. It's like, had these people not been sucked into finance, they might have done like productive things with their lives. It's really incredible, and it's this really. And then on the way out, so then you have the scene with, which I also really like. It's the scene they're driving back. It's Penn Badgley and Paul Bettany in the car, and they're having that conversation. It's one of the few conversations in a movie where they're not worried about their own shit. It's they're sort of having this conversation about like, is what we're doing even moral or important or like like relevant? And Paul Bettany's really doing this like self-justification of saying, well, if I didn't have my hands on the scale, like if finance capital didn't have its like hands on the scale, then like the world would get really fast, really fair, really fast, and nobody actually wants this.
It's so fucking funny, like the very, I think believable like portrayal of how these people would see themselves, and just how, like, the fact that they think that they're the ones helping out when they're the ones that are about to collapse, like the entirety of like the American mortgage sector. Just incredible.
This is, from my limited contact, this is entirely authentic. So I, in my brief time working with JP Morgan, I had a manager who I won't name, partly because I can't fucking remember his name. And we had a conversation, and I was not doing well in that, internship because I was clinically depressed at the time. I didn't tell them, but I was on like stupid high doses of antidepressants, and it made me kind of struggle with the work. And this guy took a liking to me and tried to kind of like sell me as like, you should be more engaged. There's a future here for you if you want it. And he said a line to me which has remained engraved with me. And I think it was this moment I realized I don't want to do this, and I decided to intentionally throw the whole thing. Is he said, listen, do you think I have to do this? I don't. I'm fucking rich. I can leave anytime I want and go, live anywhere. I'm here because this is good and it's good work and I'm making a difference.
Yeah,
and this guy was in charge of the tech teams in JP Morgan fucking Chase. Like, they're really deluded.
Yeah, and that argument comes back later as well when they're about to start trading. But it's and it's also really funny because then because like at the end, Penn Badgley's character, because he's the most junior of all of them, says, "Am I getting fired?" And then Paul Bettany just takes like a beat, and it's just like, yes, almost definitely yes, you are getting fired. Like you are the guy above you, like Zachary Quinto figured out this model and like put everything together, so he's proved his value, but like you're just a guy, and like we're clearly gonna have to sack more people, so you're fucked. Like, we don't care, like
he starts crying later in the toilets, and there's a scene where he meets the I think it's Simon Baker, isn't it? Comes into the bathroom.
Yeah.
And
yes.
there's just
for a shave.
And Simon Baker's just completely like doesn't care. Is just very detached and very like, oh well, this guy's upset. Oh well, and they have a conversation very briefly, where he's like, you'll get over it. Like it's very kind of It's interesting. It works well that the guy who gets fired is the one who's obsessed with everyone's worth as well, because you can see how that's psychologically more damaging to him than, necessarily for other people. So
yeah, because he seems to like believe in the horse shit essentially, or like he's like distanced himself enough, like he's conditioned himself enough to this environment to just be like a little psychopath from the jump. But he doesn't really have it. Like he doesn't have what it takes to just like be really in that world. Whereas like he's crying in the toilet stall, and then like Simon Baker's shaving, and why are you crying? Oh yeah, you're gonna fire me. And Simon Baker just like barely even like acknowledges him. He's like, yeah, you're a peon, like get the fuck out,
It's also like, what's interesting about the contrast is like he cares about his status because of his money, whereas the real sharks don't. That's not them. They don't actually derive their status from it. They care about using the power, but they don't, like, it's not, their egos are not caught up in like the specific dollar sign that's next to them. It's more about the power, and the dollars come with it. And it's an important distinction between the two of them, and it shows why he just doesn't have it. He cares too much about what other people think, and what the status hierarchy, what position he's in informs all of his being. Whereas these guys are doing it because they're bloodless vampires, and it's just their nature, essentially. So we get to what's the crux of it. I would say this is like the climax of the film, and then the rest is the denouement, and or denouement, however you pronounce it. Basically, they tell Rogers, right, you need to get your traders to sell it, and he's like, I really don't want to do this. And it's like, no, you're gonna do it. You're gonna make it happen. And they put screws on him, and he says fine. And so it's Kevin Spacey has to rally his traders and tell them, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do a fire sale. Here's how bad things are, and you're gonna fix it. He does it.
Sorry, where they just to briefly break in, because it's such a wonderful little moment, and I love it every time I see it. Essentially, like Jeremy Irons' character confronts Kevin Spacey's character in the bathroom and says, "I need you on board, because like the traders who need to execute the strategy we've thought up, they need to believe in what we're doing, because otherwise they're not going to do the job, and then we're still fucked. Like we're either all the way out, because we can't be half out, because then we're just going to get eaten alive." And then like He pulls this check out of the corner of his pocket, and he holds it up between his index and middle finger, and then he flicks it with his pinky. He's like, here's my tool, here's the money, here's my, take it. Here's, essentially it's like the Garden of Eden. Here's the apple, just eat it. It's such a wonderful little touch. Sorry, I love this fucking movie so much.
It's very on brand, and they come into, like, so he gives the rallying cry to the traders, and he basically says, listen, we're asking you to torture relationships, and we're aware that this is going to kill your place in the industry quite badly. So first of all, for each of you who meets your quotas, you get like £1 million or something, $1 million or $1.5 million, something like this. Sorry?
$1.4 million.
1.4 million each.
You get 1.4 million if you make 93% or something, and if the whole floor taken together makes 93%, everyone gets an extra like 1.4, 1.3 or something. Yeah.
If they make all their targets, they get like $3 million, $4 million each, essentially. Like, there's a huge incentive for them to like not think about the material consequences of their actions, but to just like.
But it's also like he's also straight up saying to him, look, I know that this is going to end your job, because no one will trust you to trade with them ever again. So we're going to buy you out. But don't worry, because this will allow the bigger thing to keep going. You're making a sacrifice, and we are rewarding you for that sacrifice. And it does exactly the same thing as was just done to him. It's just like, look, here's your check, take it. And don't worry, it's for the greater good, even though he doesn't believe in that, because he's been paid to believe in it. And so they then have a scene which starts in the morning with him phoning up, and at the start they're like, hey, we're looking to offload his assets, and someone's like, why? These are golden. And it's like, well, we're just trying to show up our books and kind of...
Yeah, they're lying. They're like, from the jump, it's Paul Bettany's voice the whole time, and they're just... He's selling something that he knows to be garbage. Like, it's when you step back from it and you look at, like, what are you doing? It's just like, you are pulling... Whether or not they would have stopped it, because that's also like a sort of point that Jeremy Irons makes in the film as well, is like they make this whether or not they would have stopped it is another question, but like they're the ones pulling the starter pistol on a massive financial crisis, and it's
so what's lovely about the way they do it is in the morning people are like, yeah, okay, we'll take that. That sounds great. And then in the afternoon, it's like he phones up and he immediately gets a fuck you, and he's like, well, no, hold on, like. I'm looking to sell this. It's like, no, fuck you, man. The market's going to hell. And he's like, well, I'm willing to sell it to you for this good price. And he's like, no, fuck you, man. He's like, well, you're still on the phone, so that tells me you actually want it. So what's the price you actually are willing to risk it on? And there's a pause, and the guy gives a counter offer, and we're like, all right, done. And then it goes 4 p.m, like near closing, and he phones up, and it's like, hey, and then the other guy on the other end goes, fuck you, and just hangs up immediately because they don't want it anymore. And it's just really nicely done. Like, it shows you how throughout the day, everyone else is figuring out what's going on. And then by the time they hit, like, near close, like, they've destroyed their reputation. No one will even talk to them, but they've done it. They've sold it all.
Yeah, and you've got Paul Bettany, when he was trying to make that last trade, when the guy gives him the offer, he has to say, he says he has to call up
Kevin
Spacey to confirm
to
it.
get sign off.
So he calls him and he says do it, put it up 2 points and do it. And he goes back to the other guy and says, all right, put it up 2 points. And he says, all right. And Paul Bettany's just like losing $135 million on one trade. Like, this is how desperate they are to get rid of these fucking useless products.
But it's better to get some money for them than to get no money for them. And so it goes on. And yeah, it's like, Wikipedia describes it as trading progresses, the firm elicits suspicion and eventually anger from their counterparties, and incurs heavy losses, but they're able to sell off most of the bad assets. That's it. They've done it. They've won. Now comes the denouement, and this is where I think the film's real heart comes in, essentially. Do you want to talk on it, Rob, or shall I?
Oh, are you talking about the conversation over late lunch with Jeremy Irons and Kevin Spacey? Yeah, again, like the framing of this scene alone is it's the executive dining room, whatever, on the however many floor, and it's daylight and all of New York, like the skyline is sort of laid out. Well, it's not the skyline, like you see down into like the housing and the projects and like the sort of the normal world is beneath them, and they are talking. It's really like they're sitting there. It's very much framed as like these are the masters of the universe. Like it's not the politicians, it's not the people in the street, it's these people doing numbers fuckstein to each other essentially, and just being like the worst possible versions of themselves. And Kevin Spacey comes in and he's like, I want out, I can't deal with this anymore. And then it's not even gradually, but like Jeremy Irons just said, look, I need you to stay, because it's fantastic as well, because he says, look, I need you to stay for at least 2 more years, because yes, there's now a giant financial panic that we caused, but there's also going to be a lot of money being made coming out of this thing. So it's like, no matter what happens, like heads, it's very much heads they win, tails you lose. Like it's very well done, because Kevin Spacey has like sort of the last gasps or whatever of a moral frame or something, but even
anything resembling a conscience.
Yeah. And Jeremy Irons just sort of says, look, he tries, whether or not the character believes it or not is almost irrelevant, because he just says, look, the world's always going to be like this. There's always going to be, a number of fat cats, and everybody else is going to be starving dogs. And he also says, Jamie and Alistair, he literally says money is fake. It's not real. It's just a piece of papers that.
Yeah, that bit really resonated with me.
Yeah, it's just pieces of paper with pictures on, so we don't have to kill each other for dinner.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And
I like the bit where he says Kevin Spacey is like, oh, you've had a good life. These last 40 years, you could have been digging ditches. And Kevin Spacey says, yeah, and at least I would have had some holes in the ground to show for it.
Yeah.
And what's also very good about this is, as this conversation is happening, remember, they're eating. Like, it's taking place in the diner. These guys are having they've had their lunch, essentially, They are continuing to eat while the crisis plays out. It's very explicit.
It's almost a physical representation of that very famous poster of like, we work for you, but at the top it's like they eat for you and they trade for you. Like it's very much like that. And then you have this Jeremy Irons does this very good monologue about like again, about there's the percentages of people who are wealthy and do it well off, and the people who are starving are always the same, and what we do doesn't hugely matter, and that it's in human nature to overreach and essentially cause crises for itself. And he does this incredible series of dates, and they're all financial crises. The ones he mentions, they're all. He begins with, I think, the South Sea shares crisis in the 17th century, I want to say, or the 16th, 17th.
Like
and it's it progresses through the ages, and for those of you so Marxistly inclined among us, the speed with which the crises come, the years of crises get closer and closer together every single time, and it's he's 1981, Christ, that really fucked me over, but it's clearly well, we're just going to do this again, and again, we will be here to make money. We will be here to make money from the crisis, and then when we come out of the crisis, we'll be here again to make more money from that. It's really it's very bleak, and it's very it's very much the heart of the movie is these people have totally divorced themselves from material consequences for humanity, essentially.
And in the background, Jared Cohen is showing Peter Sullivan in, that Simon Baker is showing Zachary Quinto in. And it is said that, Peter Sullivan's going to get promoted. Irons lets him know kind of in passing, because he's useful. And that's finally, he's getting his acceptance into the executive suite. And he's using this as illustrative to Kevin Spacey that they need people. There's plenty of place, there's plenty of room for them all to have lunch now that they've cleared out the dead wood, essentially. And it's, he basically says to Kevin Spacey, this is happening with or without you. I would like you here. I need you. I can write you a big check. And Spacey, Rogers, he accepts because he's got financial reasons. He's he needs the money. And this is kind of that's it. That's the sum of it all. Is just he wanted to resign. He was told, no, stick around for this. Then he's okay, I've done your dirty work. Now I want to resign. He's well, now you've done it. You might as well stay for the rest of it. And that's it. It's once you've sold your soul, that's it. There's no getting it back. It's always easier and easier to sell out next time.
And then we get to the one scene that pretty much comes close to ruining the movie, and I always skip because I hate it so much. It's at the beginning of the movie they introduced that Kevin Spacey's character is actually really sad because his dog is dying, and then at the end he's burying his dog, and it's a very mediocre metaphor for his conscience and what's happening, etc., etc. So I prefer not to think of that scene because it's bad and stupid.
Well, I'm going to give it a little bit more credit than this. So the metaphor is that he's sad about the dog dying because the dog was his marriage. He got the dog from his wife, essentially. It was part of their marriage. He got it when they split, and the dog is ill. And during the course of the film, he has to euthanize the dog. Yeah. And then he goes back to bury the dog in his wife's yard. And the metaphor they're going for
it's
is
also his
that
conscience, or it's just kind of ham-fisted.
He lost his wife's marriage because he became too invested in the firm, spent too much time in Wall Street, got away from who he is, but he had the dog to remember it all by, and now in this last moment he's had to kill his conscience, put the dog down, and so he returns tearfully to accept it's gone and buries it where it belongs, with his ex-wife, who comes out, and what's really funny and what I think redeems this scene is that she informs him that their son's firm also sustained heavy losses but avoided bankruptcy. His son's going to do exactly the same shit. That's what makes that a little bit worthwhile.
Well, it's also a callback to a scene we skipped earlier in the movie where it's one of the rare ones where they're outside, and it's Zachary Quinto's character and Kevin Spacey's character, and he's did you talk to your son today? Did you let him know what's happened? And then Kevin Spacey's oh yeah, no, I completely forgot to do that. It's pretty fucking incredible.
And it's
did he forget, or was it just that he can't because of the sworn
no, he
secrecy,
forgot.
aren't they?
He forgot. It's just I just whoops,
And it's meant to be it's twofold. It's showing he's lost his soul and he's lost his family and he's lost the things that make him human. But it's also showing subtly that his son is gonna grow up and do exactly the same thing. Like Jeremy Irons said, it's recurring, it's eternal. It's it's layered in, and there's always going to be generations of these fuckers are doing this. And look, there's the next generation coming up who hasn't yet lost a marriage and had to bury his dog, but it's there, it's baked in. And that I think is what that little bit, that very last bit about the sun's firm made it through okay, is what I think makes that scene all right. There'd been I don't like the metaphor of burying a dog, but I get it. And just the whole idea of like the institutional, this is a legacy thing that will go through generations, as you are doing, your son is going to do in future, and we know he is because he's survived the layoffs. Like, it's nice. I like it. It's not about this particular cadre of fuckers, rather it's about the generations of them that will always be on top and always knifing each other and always eating their lunches, Yeah,
it's just a great movie. I just love it. It's subtle. It doesn't treat the viewer like an idiot. I fucking love this. I can't express enough how much I love this movie. It's almost like, and I said before, like it reminds me a lot of Glengarry Glen Ross. And whereas when I was looking at it again, I was like, I think you could do this entire movie. Like, I think you could do it as a play in a theater, because it only requires 8 actors, essentially, plus some extras to stand in for the cleaners and stuff. But it's only 8 people who are really, like, about it, essentially. Like, you could do this in a theater, and it would still work really well if you got, like, a good cast for it. But, yeah.
There's a bit I want to read from Wikipedia, because it quotes a review of it, which I think is sums it up quite well. So, A.O. Scott wrote this: Margin Call is a thriller moving through ambient shadows to the anxious tempo of Nathan Larson's hushed, anxious score. It is also a horror movie.
Score, yeah.
Yeah, well,
sorry.
It is also a horror movie with disaster lurking like an unseen demon outside the skyscraper windows and behind the computer screens. It is also a workplace comedy of sorts. The crackling, syncopated dialogue and the plot, full of reversals and double crosses, owes a great and obvious debt to David Mamet's profane fables of deal-making machismo. Hovering over all of it is the dark romance of capital, the elegance of numbers, the kinkiness of money, the deep, rotten, erotic allure of power. And I think that's a perfect summary of the film, honestly. It really is showing you the dark temptation. Like when Rob said, like, it's the Garden of Eden, it is. Like, it's a fable of a Garden of Eden translated into modern terms. It's like, rather than knowledge and the crime of going against God, it's money, and it's selling out your soul for it. And it pulls no punches in showing you the dark, sterile, vampiric allure that comes with all of this. Should we talk about the score briefly, actually? Because you're right, we haven't talked about it, and it is fucking good.
I mean, I don't have really much to say, except, like, I just fucking love it.
I've got an amusing 1-star review to read out to you all.
Oh, go on.
So, Jimbo says, never has so much acting talent been assembled in one place, only to be completely and utterly wasted. The cast do not so much telephone their performers in as send them by carrier pigeon. The next paragraph, they're annoyed at how often they say the word fuck for some reason. And they give a summary of what they think should have happened. Here's what I thought was going to happen. Spoiler alert, this is not what happens. So I thought when So I thought when Spock realizes,
like inviting someone round to watch like fucking Iron Man, going, spoiler alert, Darth Vader doesn't die at the end.
So I thought when Spock realizes how bad things are and brings it to the attention of Kaiser Soze, he, Spock, it's like Jamie wrote this, but like more, like less capably.
Like, really less fun, yeah.
Yeah. He, Spock, would be told that everything is under control and then would spend the rest of the movie trying to dodge the hitman that had been put on his tail to prevent him disclosing that they're fucked.
This is like Marina Hyde writing or something. Just that like where it's like, oh, they don't so much phone it in as like desperately flicking through a fucking book of like older versions of telecommunications. Carrier pigeon. They send them by carrier pigeon.
Scar would only be brought in at the last minute, not as the head honcho of the firm, but as the super successful hitman who needs to be put on the case because Spock has used his secret taekwondo training to fight off all the previous assassins.
This is
how you use
one
Jeremy
of the most
Irons.
tedious fucking bits I think I've ever heard anyone do.
It's also like it's kind of telling because what's going on there is this guy's thinking, "Oh, this would be much better if it was a story about corporate malfeasance and the cover up, and then we could use that to introduce action." And it's like not getting that there is no cover up.
No, the guy is 1000% doing a bit. He wrote this because it's like he thinks he's like fucking comedy genius, and he's been sharing it around all his friends, and maybe even put it on his fucking CV if he wants to work as a writer. Like. This might well be like a fucking early entry from some like goon who's on Mock the Week regularly now or something. It has that like look at how clever I am like air to it. It is absolutely not a fucking serious take on what the film they think the film should have been about. They just like they think that this is like fucking hilarious.
Someone gave 1 star just because it had no subtitles, so it was a varied bunch.
Yeah, I don't know. It's good. Like on the subject of the music, though, this film does a lot to convey anxiety with very little. It's quite interesting. The music does a lot to kind of play the emotional state of the characters, whilst they themselves are trying hard not to show their like emotional like response to realizing how fucked they all are. It's quite good. It's subtle and I like it. So, anyway, closing thoughts.
Yeah, just go watch it. It's
That was
fucking
good.
great.
Yeah, it's alright. It feels like a good corollary to The Big Short.
Yeah.
I think what's good about it is The Big Short
I don't think I've seen The Big Short either. Is that the one with Vin Diesel in?
No, it's the one that Adam McKay became really famous with. Essentially, it's got Brad Pitt in it and the bunch of people.
Steve Carell,
Christian Bale, Steve Carell. Yeah, it's. I have a bit more mixed feelings about The Big Short, but that's a different episode.
I think the difference between these two films is The Big Short is fundamentally shot from the perspective of you and I. Like, it takes outsiders who are short sellers who are betting against the system, but it's very much rooted in this is the consequences of this is going to be dire for us, and it's shot from that perspective. Margin Call is not the perspective of you and I. Margin Call is the other side. It is the vampire castle, if you will, at the top of it all, looming over the New York skyscraper. And it's good for that reason. It's a peer into another world in which we do not have purchase.
See, when you said the consequences will be dire, I just thought that fucking the share zone thing about return my Wiimote immediately.
No, my central problem with the Big Short is that it makes heroes of short sellers who are just as vampiric and cunty in real life.
Oh yeah, they are.
As everybody else. So whatever. But again, story for a different day. But yeah,
what's the one with Vin Diesel in that I'm thinking of them?
Is that Triple X?
No, it's Boiler Room. It's Boiler Room for sure. It's with Giovanni Ribisi, which it's a good movie, but it sags a lot in the middle.
I actually don't know anything about that movie. I might need to look it up. But anyway, in the meantime, I guess that does it. I think that does it for this cultural committee. So
yeah.
Yeah, I hope you
Shall
like us
we
talking about the occasional like a good movie for a change.
Yeah,
it's pleasant for
And
us.
if you don't, then like fuck you didn't pay to get in.
We'll be back to crap movies or interesting bad movies in the not too distant future. So we should probably close out with our usual plugs. If you enjoyed this and would like more of this kind of thing, then please consider subscribing to us on Patreon at patreon.com/praxiscast. You can listen to our ramblings over on Twitter on @praxiscast. You can buy merch and t-shirts from us on praxiscast.tmail.com. And we also do streaming. Am I right in thinking, Jamie and Alistair, that it's Thursdays we do streaming?
It is currently, yes, Wednesdays and Thursdays.
Vampires, Terraria, and Stellaris, depending on what's going on.
Wednesday night is the Spectacular Draculas, and Thursday night is the Everyone Annoy Jamie.
The Jamie
stream.
Payne Zone.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, we the last 2 streams we've been hamstrung by game updates, which just feels like a fucking shit way to run a railroad, if I'm honest. We had to start over in Stellaris, and now we've had to start over in Terraria as well, because we don't get the magic pool that they added in the patch that they fucking did like a week after we started playing the fucking thing. So I have been having some fun this weekend building a new house in the new server. So look forward to seeing that. It'll all stop being fun when I have to actually go underground and fight something.
Yeah. The next step is Jamie becoming a digital buy-to-let landlord. He's also entering the metaverse.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
All right. And with that all said, hope this was entertaining. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Night.
Later.